Okay, Megan, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I'm super excited. This is kind of round two, part two. We had some technical issues that we were going through last time, but I think it's sat us today in like a great place to kind of continue that conversation. We know even more about each other, now, and so I'm just really excited that we're able to do this again. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. We'll come back bigger, better, stronger here second time around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not having any of the issues we were having before, so that's
Yeah,
that
no,
that's always a great thing. So, thank you again. This should be awesome. Well, I mean, to get started, I mean, I'd love to kind of get just into your story of how you got into kind of van life from the very beginning. And then we'll kind of just keep working our way, up through today and towards the future.
cool. I'll give you like the really bird's eye view arc of just kind of my experience in the vans plural and in between. But I first moved into a van in 2017 with a partner at the time, and the goal was really just travel, like spend a year, visit all 50 states, see as much as possible. So it was really just kind of driven by adventure, and I was living in San Francisco at the time and really just kind of knew it wasn't the spot for me, and I was ready to kind of leave, but didn't really know where I wanted to go instead. So it was kind of all about travel, but also kind of finding the next place to maybe settle down. So as we traveled across the country, we we're kind of always evaluating different places through the eyes of like, whoa, do we think we could live here? Like, what do we like? What do we not like? And so we spent a little over a year doing that before that relationship ended. And I moved back home for about 6 months total. But kind of the beginning of after that relationship, I really actually thought I was done with fan life. I was just kind of generally feeling burnt out on travel and living in the van and all the things that really put me in a place of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I didn't think it was going to be a van. But kind of fast forward a little bit in life, I guess, just the biggest variable for me was still location. I just didn't know where I wanted to be. And during that time, I was really just like looking to have a place of my own. And I didn't know where that would be. I was looking at apartments and jobs and all the different things in different cities, and it felt just really overwhelming. So ultimately, I decided that building out another van was actually a really good solution to that problem of giving myself kind of a home on wheels that I could continue to travel and check out places that were on like a top 10 type of list that I just wasn't really sure about, or I wasn't ready to make the commitment of. And even before I built out the van, I was actually really seriously looking into tiny homes, which was ultimately more the direction I would have liked to go. But with a tiny home, you still really like need a place to put it. Like I wasn't looking to have a tiny home that I like carry behind me and go all over. I wanted it to be somewhere, and that's just a little harder than it sounds, which I didn't really realize as I started looking into it. So we kind of ended back on the van trip. And I reached out to some friends who are very good at building vans, and they were gracious enough to come out and help me build out my van. So I did it with the help of two friends that, I couldn't have done it without them. And they came and we built it out at my parents' house in about 6 weeks, which was very, very fast and could not have been done if he didn't have some experience doing it. And yeah, and then I spent about a year, a little bit more, in that van solo before moving to Boise, which is where I am now and have been since last summer.
So now you just currently you're using the van kind of just intermittently for like trips, weekend trips, kind of weekend warrior stuff right now.
Yeah, the goal is to, keep the van or potentially maybe sell the van and get something similar as an adventure vehicle and, have this as my home base, but still do some travel and adventure amongst that. Although since I've been here, I've really just kind of realized that it's nice to be in one place for a little bit. So not traveling in the last, kind of 6 to 9 months has actually been a little bit of a nice break, and I'm sure that will change in the future and I'll get excited about travel again. But it's been a little bit of a nice change of pace, especially given the last year. Just to have a consistent, stable place to call home has been nice.
Yeah, yeah, definitely probably good timing with that, considering like, the stories I've heard from some people. And thinking back to what you said too with about those tiny homes, is it's funny that they are transportable, but they're not, people don't realize like you're not just going to take those on the road like you would an RV. Like you can't take those from camp. So like they can be moved a few times here to there. But like, so I think a lot of people have this different perception of those tiny homes that like, oh, you can just, hitch one of those behind you and take it where you want. But that's not necessarily the case.
And then even thinking about trying to put it somewhere though, you think like, oh, it's just as easy as like parking it in someone's backyard or like, you can find a place to put it. But then there's so many different rules and regulations depending on the state and the county and like where that's allowed and if it's not. So you really kind of need to have like a friend or a family friend that like happens to have the perfect piece of property where they're like, yeah, you can put your home on this piece of property and that.
Yeah. And it's becoming quite, it's definitely becoming a thing that's, obviously happening more and more. So I think, places and counties and cities, are having to regulate those kinds
Yeah.
of, and they, obviously create some precedents. And, because I was thinking earlier when you were saying it, it really is such a great way for the kind of young, maybe, 18 to mid 20s, a really nice way for people of that age to maybe do something, kind of cheap and affordable that they can own, but to kind of maybe help them find where they want to settle down, where they want to, end up living, maybe for the rest of their life. And
Yeah.
that is cool.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool thing about the a lot of people that choose to kind of live in a van for a while too is you see these crazy nice vans, but there was this wave of generation of people who had saved a lot of money to buy a house and then realized that they still could not afford to buy a house. So they took, that big chunk of money and put it into a really nice van that they could, whether they were living in it or traveling in it. But I think, yeah, there's definitely still a wave of people like that value experiences over space and still want, a place to call home, but they just realize they don't need as much of it. So I think tiny homes are very much still up and coming and will, become more of a thing than even they are now. But regulations and stuff, I think, are still catching up.
Yeah. Yeah. Then that's, I mean, isn't that always what is it like that? Something, regulations always behind innovation. Like they're always trying to keep up with that stuff afterwards. And, obviously a lot of the things with being on wheels, I know kind of get away, having them kind of, ID'd as kind of an RV, kind of get them through a lot of the regulations as far as temporarily being on land. So that's definitely one of the nice parts about that, aspect of the tiny home, at least community, is that you can kind of get away from, maybe some of the regulations that if you just put like the ones that are structured to the ground.
Yeah, which is easier because with the structures, you're dealing with like minimum size requirements, which for tiny homes just like is still bigger than what you would be planning on building. But yeah, and there's now rules with like ADUs and stuff. Like a lot of cities and counties are kind of implementing these things to allow people to have like an ADU unit in their backyard, which is, more opportunity for tiny homes and stuff. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, I know we're going through that right now, trying to figure out with a bunch of different little things, like, what we can put, what needs to be permitted, what doesn't. And it, every city and county and state has so many of their own little regulations that it's kind of
And
a
you're used as like a studio and kind of just extra workspace, right? Like you're not renting it out or it's not living quarters.
yeah, no, it's not anything like that. But the fact it's one of those ones, I built it undersized to be able to not need to be, um, you know,
Permitted. That's so
but
nice.
yeah, but at the same time, it's like I did put electrical and a water and sink. So it's like, even though it's really is temporary, I probably could have and should have. And in the future, as we move it to wherever the permanent structure will be, I'll definitely have like submit the plans to have it, permitted on there, and then they'll just do the little inspection. But
You ask for forgiveness later.
yeah, no, sometimes that definitely is exactly how it works. But yeah, so with as you kind of got on the road, I mean, you not too many people maybe have spent time in two different vans, two different builds. Are there maybe some of the things that you've learned over, over two experiences that you've kind of seen really work for certain vans, and maybe don't, maybe some ideas of things that people think will work great, but don't end up, turning out?
I think I learned a lot from my first van. It was also super helpful to live in a van before I tried to like design and build a van. Like a lot of people that just go into building the van, never having done it, I don't know how they know what they're, not what they're doing, but like what they need in it. Research in YouTube, I guess. But the first van, like I had no part in the design or the layout. It was just already put together. And the layout was super inefficient. So from the beginning of that van, I had a long list of like things that I would have wanted to do better. It was also a longer extended sprinter. So coming out of that experience, going into building my van, the things that I knew I wanted were the shorter wheelbase, just so I would feel more comfortable driving it and being anywhere. A higher bed platform that my bike would fit underneath rather than having it outside the van. But also a permanent bed platform that was always set up that I didn't have to like convert back to a table and chair type of setup. I knew that I was going to be working remotely, so I needed like a comfortable place to sit and work from the van. And other than that, like, I wanted a great kitchen that I could cook meals in, and the space is so tiny that once you define one thing, like having a permanent bed platform, the rest just kind of has to fall into place based on what you have. And my layout from when I started to what we ended up with didn't really change too much. There were a few things I think where I was trying to like cram too much, like have this L-shaped bench and then also want all of this counter space and stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, there's just not room for that. We gotta something has to go. But overall, like my layout, I'm super happy with. I wouldn't change anything other than the fact that I sleep side to side, which works. I'm 5'9", I fit. And if I'm the only one in the bed, then it's super easy. You kind of go diagonal. There's plenty of space. It's really comfortable. But it wouldn't be super versatile for two people. I think it'd be a little crammed. But if I would have turned the bed the other way to sleep kind of front to back, you're giving up a lot of living space in the front. So it's not necessarily that I would have done that instead, but that's maybe the only pain point that I really have with my layout and build.
Now, is that pretty common with the side to side, or do people normally have those beds, like front to back?
People normally go front to back. Is definitely more common. If people do go side to side, they usually have the bump outs, which are really expensive and just like don't ultimately give you that much more room. If you're in a ProMaster, those are a little wider, so it's much more common for people to go side to side. But in the sprinters, most commonly you usually see front to back.
So with yours was just the sprinter, but the shorter version.
Yeah.
With that, and you said, man, that did you 16 days that
6 weeks.
Oh, 6 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's crazy. I was talking to somebody recently too that had done it in just like a couple weeks, and it's like, it's just crazy seeing like how fast you can actually get some of these done. I mean, obviously dependent upon everything from how detailed you want to go into the build process to is it like with the porta potty, or not a porta potty, but the composting toilets, like it how well those are in there. Some people put like a grill, a porta potty, and a little cot, and they've got got themselves a
They put a platform bed in the back and they're good. With like
yeah.
a cabinet.
So for yours, if you want to go into like, how much did your whole build out cost? How much was your van, and then how much was kind of did it cost to build it out?
The cost of the van alone was about 45,000, and then I put about 10,000 into it in supplies and materials, just underneath 10.
Okay, that's actually really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I did it pretty cost effectively, which was great. I wasn't paying huge labor costs, which is definitely kind of the difference between once you go to like a professional build level. That's really like the only way you can save money by, doing it yourself. But yeah, I think it definitely helped. I just kind of knew what I was looking for and what I was getting into.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's actually the as you said that my brain went, and it's funny as you being the kind of work you do, it's like it thought right away like what is the average, cost ratio to the van per the build, how much of that is common, and and then what your kind of percentage, because that seems really low. I mean, to be able to do that seems like had to be really efficient with what you put in, and obviously, choices of materials and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you definitely have to like pick a few areas where like pick the things that you really care about and then pick a few things that you can kind of go on the cheaper side. Um, and everyone has different priorities, I think, for that. Like I cared about my electrical system, and that's like, at least a third of my total cost right there. And I wanted like a fridge was kind of my other splurge. I bought a nice fridge that I felt like would treat me well. Um, and other than that, there were things, like I bought the cheaper fan or, cheaper materials in different ways. I made all of my own like cushions, curtains, window covers, so that like it's just a huge money saver as well if you're able to kind of do some of that sort of stuff yourself.
Okay. So yeah, just finding those little kind of little ways to, save money where you can on the build. And then as well as, kind of the overall cost, um, with the solar, how did that work for you? Did, you said it's about a third of the entire cost of the build. I mean, that obviously at 10,000 for the whole, that doesn't surprise me that it wasn't about half of your build. So,
It's the most expensive part for sure. So like I have 300 watts of solar with I want to say 400 maybe 500 amp hours of battery, all through Brenergy, and that system has treated me really well.
okay. So did you buy one of the kits that, comes with all the stuff and, okay.
Yeah, and Brenergy is great because you can kind of call and talk to them and like be like, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking to do, and they kind of help advise you about like this is what we think you need for that. So we talked to them and they kind of suggested like a couple different options and then chose from there. So
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, with the solar and the batteries are great. I think there's definitely like cloudy days in the winter where you struggle to have enough power unless you're driving a lot. Because I do also charge the batteries, charge the house batteries while driving, which is a great feature to have. But if you're not driving and you have no sun, then after a day or two, you start to
Now you can just turn on the van as well though and charge it, like, I mean, and use basically the van as a generator, or does it?
really charge. You're not going to really get anywhere. Like to actually charge your batteries just by turning the engine on, you're not going to really get anywhere. Even like 10 minutes of driving isn't going to get you anywhere. You got to be like 2 hours of driving to really like get a charge on your battery.
Okay. Okay. And do you use the generator at all to supplement that, or no? You've been able to get away without having that?
It totally worked. And like for the biggest like things that I absolutely needed was like I need to charge my cell phone and my computer. And then there's things like, okay, maybe I won't use my blender today, like conserve a little bit of power. But those were really like luxury extras that weren't necessary. And I had a gas, like a propane stove. So like cooking was not dependent on power, which was really great as well.
What about the fridge? Was your fridge like the biggest constant that needed to basically?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The fridge was definitely the biggest constant draw. And even so, like pretty efficient still. But yeah, like on a series of cloudy days, if I'm not moving, then it's the fridge that's kind of draining the batteries.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so yeah, sometimes did you find yourself in many moments where you actually had to just pack everything up and take the van on a drive to?
There's been a few random nights where I'd get stressed out about the battery level, like at night, knowing that, overnight it's probably going to drop below where it should be. And maybe I'm like turning the van on for, an hour before, or like going for a short drive somewhere. But overall, like really hasn't been a big issue. And it's more just like the anxiety of worrying about it than it actually being an issue even.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I don't know, for at least people that try to be prepared, that's maybe the hardest thing, is there's more stress that comes from the worried about what's going to happen than, whatever does. But, I mean, that's part of being prepared with that.
You just got to get real comfortable with the unknowns.
Now, what about with over the years that you've been doing this with internet and kind of dealing with that, with working on the road?
Mhm.
How is kind of, for maybe tips out there for people that maybe are struggling?
Yeah, that's probably the question I get asked the most often, and I never feel like I have a great answer for it. Like my work was really easily sustained by having a mobile hotspot, with like 20 gigs of data, subsidized kind of by like my phone's hotspot if that was running out. And that always worked really well for me. I'm not really on a lot of like video chats or things that would really suck data on the computer for work. And way back when, like I used to spend a lot of time in coffee shops and stuff, and it was nice to get out of the van and work. But last year, that was obviously kind of a different story. So it was a kind of a new experience, actually. Like when the pandemic started, I was in St. George, Utah, and with all of the unknowns that were happening, it was kind of like the decision of, am I just going to kind of buckle down and stay here, or am I going to maybe go home? And I decided to just stay where I was, and I spent 8, 9 weeks out in the desert, just like boondocked, going in to get groceries when needed. But, fully at that point, working remote from the van 100% of the time. And that was the first time that I'd really done that without going to coffee shops or anything like that. And it was actually kind of great, it was nice just kind of being out in the wide open. Utah's really perfect for that if you can, when you find a spot with service. But just kind of a cool experience to actually really make the van my permanent mobile office and just spend my days working and going for bike rides. And definitely fresh air and biking got me through kind of quarantine and being alone. So that was great.
Yeah. Now, where you were there many other like kind of people like yourself, or were you like actually kind of isolated?
There were definitely some other people out and about and around, like you would see other bands and campers. I think just due to the times, it was really just like I kept to myself, just with like a lot of weird unknowns going on. And that's maybe more my nature, anyways, like, to kind of tend to keep to myself, anyways. So there were other people around. It was not as busy as I think it would have been otherwise, though.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't even imagine some of the different places that maybe, people like had actually migrated to and flocked to, that were already popular maybe for the RV and van life kind of communities.
I
So
know, I know that the outdoors in general were impacted, just seeing a lot more traffic. And I think I was surprised that I didn't see more people flocking to that area. And maybe just because, like within Utah, like the Moab and eastern kind of desert area is a more popular spot to go. And things in the St. George area, like Zion National Park, is right there, but it was closed. So maybe that was just less reason for people to kind of be around. But sort of felt like I had it all to myself, and it was pretty magical, actually.
well, yeah, I mean, that's got to be nice, just at that time, just kind of being able to enjoy that and because I mean, I like talking to people about that because it's such a moment in time, one that I think everybody remembers, but it was such a decision-making time for a lot of, especially these people on the road. Like you're somewhere that's usually not your home or like your home base, and like, what do you do when you
Yeah.
basically everything is going to shut down? Like, what do you decide? What did kind of different people decide?
It was an interesting time, and I felt like there was a lot of pressure, um, for people in vans to go home or to go, find a place to be more permanently, like go find a driveway. And it was kind of like a weird, like if you don't do this, then you're being irresponsible type of thing. And to some extent, I understand why a lot of people did want to do that. And I think some of the things that I had in my van that really allowed me to just stay out and be totally fine was the fact that I did have a shower, and I did have a toilet, and I did have, my electrical system that with my hotspot that I was allowed to work from. Because a lot of the people that I know that really struggled when the pandemic hit was just that, like, all these public resources, that you're used to, like going to the gym and showering or like go into this coffee shop, were just totally shut down. So like these really vital things of, being able to live your life were now gone, or like where you fill up water, just basic things that you wouldn't normally think about all of a sudden are gone.
Yeah, that's almost an interesting thing that it's like if you're gonna be in van life or bus or RV, whatever it is that's like that, it's like you almost need to think in some ways like a prepper, with even down to your internet and things like that. And it's like you can see just by your experience to maybe a couple other people that weren't as prepared in that moment, like, man, you think about like if you would almost have the common theme, like if I live on the road or I can take my home with me wherever that I am, they're like, oh, I'm doing great. I'm self-sufficient. I'm reliant. Like if, whatever shit hits the fan, like I can get off somewhere into nature. But it's like some of those little things. It's like, no, maybe people actually need to make sure, like, can you stay off for 2 weeks? Like, do you, like how long can you be off the grid for?
Yeah. And one thing that's really cool about van life is a lot of people go into it not necessarily with the intention of, wanting to be outdoors and, traveling and doing all these outdoor activities. They really are more like urban dwellers that live around cities. And I think it's really cool that that's an option. And I used to spend a lot more time, around cities as well, just like kind of during the week when I was working. And then I'd kind of like spend my weekends out somewhere. So it's really cool. I think that the vans kind of enable that lifestyle in a more urban area, but those are definitely the people that were also way more impacted by like COVID and everything being shut down.
And maybe, maybe it's something to be said as well for the impact. Like, for example, like for even your Instagram, like you would look at your Instagram and be like, oh, this person spends literally every second of their life doing an amazing adventure out in nature. And it's like people, and it's the same with other people. They don't see the other, 4 days a week that are in a city, are using public resources, whether it's a library or the gym, like you're saying, or things like that. And so a lot of people probably miss that part too. Like, oh, they were affected in all of these other ways, where it can be deceiving with.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I really like to remind people that Instagram is, at the end of the day, is still just like a highlight reel of people's lives. And like, no matter how much you think you know about them and this dream life that they're living, like, it's still just a very small piece of it. So, like with me working all the time, it's like, yeah, you could look at my Instagram and it looks like I'm just spending all my time outdoors, like hiking and biking and doing nothing else. But really, what I'm doing most of the day all week is just sitting at a computer working. So that's just not as exciting to share about.
Yeah. But the more I almost see it as the more that the people that are out there doing it, like it's almost you see it as like a responsibility, for some of the people to show what it's really like and to not, nobody wants to be, I don't want to say fool, but like go into situations not understanding the real expectation of what things are like. And, even the prettiest thing or dream or thing that you're going after, like when you look at it day by day, it's never glamorous and it usually sucks that day. It usually was a bunch of work you didn't want to do that day to, hopefully down the line have it be something nice.
Yeah, I think the logistics of living in a van is probably the thing that took me most by surprise in like my early time living in a van, just like as an unexpected thing. Like the planning that goes into everything is just so much more time consuming than I ever imagined. Like you're not just figuring out where you want to go from like a travel and like where you want to hike, but like you have to figure out where you want to sleep, where you're going to eat, where you're going to fill up your water, where you can go to the bathroom, like all these things in a totally new city constantly. So like the first year when I was traveling, like we were moving really fast and we covered a lot of ground and we'd stay in a place, for no more than like a day or two. And that's really hard to keep up with. And in the last year, I very much changed kind of my approach to travel. And after just like learning a lot about that, and especially knowing that at that point I was working full time, where my first year I was only really working part time in the van. So knowing that I was going to be working full time, really just slowing down and giving yourself more time in places to allow you to kind of relax a little bit and just be there and not be too worried about the next place.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine like just taking that kind of pace. Like I would need a couple weeks at each location, just to have that, I don't know, like travel days, or even like with you when camping, it's like a travel day is like the day you get there and the day you leave, those don't count as camping. Like you're working, you're doing stuff. So it's like I could see.
Those are the days where you feel the most exhausted afterwards. Like I just drove 10 hours. I don't know why I'm so tired. I didn't do anything other than drive, but
Yeah, so you want to get those kind of places. And I imagine too that, after a few years, it's maybe nice after a few years where you can find some places that and can kind of go to again. You know what to expect, you know what's around, you know what I mean? And it's like not so much like that, because that has got to be a big part of it at first. And I know even as I've watched like a lot of, videos of different channels that show, how they find campsites, how they, it's like, that's an 18-step process to find like one new spot, make sure it's going to be good, make sure, so if you're doing that every day, every couple days.
Hard, yeah. Like you're hoping it's going to be a good spot, but you don't really know what you're going to get once you get there.
Yeah, that's true. Like a lot of times you see people say it can be real, Google Maps is pretty deceiving when it comes to a lot of stuff, or, even
It's a lot of work to find good places. And at the end of the day, like that really awesome campsite that you're going to get is really still only like 1 in 20 that you'll stay at, you know?
yeah. Yeah. And then as well, you know, like, did you ever find running into the issue of like, as these things become more popular, more of these areas just becoming more flooded? And I don't want to say like you know, over tourized.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've definitely, because it's gotten more popular and just like camping in general, you know, like campgrounds are definitely harder to find a spot in. Like with the van, more regularly, you're like boondocking or typically finding some type of free camping, which is both great because it's generally kind of more wide open and you can probably find a spot, but it's also really hard to plan for, like, because you could show up to a place and maybe just there's no spots left and you don't really know that till you get there. So it's a different kind of way of living, and I always kind of joke that it's just made me incapable of planning anything now. Like people ask me like, it's Friday, you know, like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? I'm like, I don't really know, we're gonna wake up Saturday morning, we're gonna see, just because that's the mentality that's kind of stuck with me since the van, that I don't necessarily want to keep, but you really just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. And if you get somewhere and it's full, it's like, okay, well, let's go find another place. Like ideally you might have a few options lined up, but
Well, and I mean, that's got to at least be the nice part with vans. And I know from talking to different people, like the van is like the one, I don't want to say stealth, but like in a way that like you can almost park a van anywhere. With a lot of these other rigs, it's like, man, you really have to be somewhere that it's okay to be for the night. You can half get away with it almost any time with a van. And even if like worst case scenario, you have to just get up, jump in front and move your van, like, but
yeah, that's a really great point. And with the van, that is one of the benefits, that at the end of the day, you can always kind of pull over and like jump in the back and sleep if that's what you need to do. And in cities, like I've spent a lot of time in cities where, you know, you just kind of self camp and like, yeah, you're pulling up on a road and just kind of under the radar, hanging out in the van, doing my normal thing on some sort of residential street or, you know, in an industrial area, different things that you come to kind of gravitate towards. And I've always really liked that ability to kind of just, you know, be in a city and find a spot. And that's probably what's gotten harder depending on the place. Like places like San Diego are almost impossible to like just kind of go sleep on the street there now, because those kinds of areas are so impacted. And people just kind of know what they're looking for now. Like 3 years ago when I was in a van and we just like pull over and sleep on some random street, like no one would look at that van and expect there to be someone in there. And even still, I think people don't necessarily expect there to be someone in there, even though they probably know what that van is used for now. But
how more, the more and more you see them, like you see all these telltale signs that right away too. It's like, oh, you have the air,
the fan, like the things that if you know what you're looking for, give it away immediately.
yeah, even my gentleman Nick that I had on a couple episodes ago, he was a coworker of mine that his van was parked, right next to me every day at work. And I knew like, okay, somebody lives in this van. And some, because it had the solar panel, it had the vent, it had the, I think the little window on the side that people install.
Yeah.
So you get all those things and you just know,
Yeah. And the other thing that I was really careful about when I built out my van was just the fact that it could be light tight. So like from the inside, if I was in there at night with lights on, that you would not be able to tell from the outside. And that's kind of an important aspect if you do want to be in like any type of urban area.
And how were you able to kind of take care of that?
The biggest thing is just the window coverings to make sure that they are like pretty well sealed. So there's not like little pockets of light around the outside. And then the other big thing is just the curtain in the front to make sure that that's like totally sealed off, which some people do the pocket door in the front, which I think is probably a better solution if that's really like a need for you. But that didn't really work with my design and build, but the curtain, you know, worked great. It was triple layered. Just make sure you can seal it along the edges and you're fine.
Okay. Yeah, because that's one of those things that I wouldn't have even thought of, is that light while you're in there. You really don't want any of that kind of getting out. The other
Yeah.
thing I thought of as I was saying that is the smell from cooking. Like, oh, you walk next to a van, you just see smoke or whatever coming out of the roof vent there.
And when I'm in my van cooking and like in a residential area or something, I'm like, oh, if someone's walking by, they probably are smelling something and they either know it's coming from the van or they don't. But that's a risk. That's the risk of taking.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's almost like there's not too many ways of getting around that one.
Yeah.
But
Definitely if you're pretty respectful and not bothering anyone, then depending where you're at, then most people won't bother you either.
well, after doing it for a few years, have you had kind of issues very many places, or was there maybe a certain place that like was kind of worse than anywhere else you've been to for?
I really haven't really had any problems. Like I feel like I've gotten really good at trusting my gut as far as like knowing where to stay and where not to. And in like the total of 3 years, like I was only knocked on by the cops one time. And that was kind of knowing going into it of like we're parked in a spot that we like shouldn't really be, but we're gonna see if it works. And they were nice and asked us to leave and we're kind of like, yeah, we know, okay, well we'll head over. So it wasn't that big of a deal. There's been definitely nights where I have not slept great if I'm in a place where I like kind of know I shouldn't be, which you just start to avoid those places knowing that you're not going to sleep well, so like what's the point of staying there? So
Now, is that fear, more from kind of the police off side, or maybe just from people trying to break inside? Because I think that would be, obviously, I would be way more concerned about someone trying to break in. The police, like, the worst they're gonna do is ask you to move. I mean, it's hard to imagine getting arrested. But obviously somebody breaking in, that's a whole different story.
yeah, my thought process, which I'm sure is like a little naive, is that if someone breaks into the van, they're not expecting anyone to be in there. So if someone's breaking in and then they realize there is someone in there, they're probably going to be just as freaked out as you are and take off. Obviously there's plenty of precautions that I still took as a solo female traveler to be safe. But I was like, you definitely become really aware of your surroundings and, noises, you're paying attention to noises, but I never really felt unsafe. I never felt like, everyone was going to break into the van while I was in there. If I was to like leave the van and go away for like 24 hours and leave it on a city street, then I'd probably be more stressed. But I've always felt like if I'm in the van, there's like, which is probably so silly and less safe, but there's more control over that situation. Like the one time in my first van, we had our bikes on the back of the van on a bike rack, and we were in Southern California. And we woke up one night to some kids trying to cut the bike lock off and like steal the bikes. And we just like kind of turned around and like banged on the back window, and the kids were scared as hell and ran off real quick. So they don't expect anyone to be in there.
Yeah, that's for sure. They say most crime is just a crime of opportunity. So if you can just do whatever you can to take away that little bit of opportunity, then or like you said, like be there to just scare the crap out of somebody.
When I mean, I lived in San Francisco for like 8 years, kind of before van life and all that. And so when I go back to the city to visit friends, if I'm in the van, I'll stay in the van. And I have lots of friends who are always, offering me guest bedrooms. Like, wouldn't you rather stay here than stay in the van? But like, that's one of the places that I've been afraid of, like just having the van parked on the street if I'm not in it, where if I'm sleeping in it, then I somehow feel a lot more comfortable about it.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I mean, I imagine most people don't have to think about that very often, because if you're living in it, like there's not going to be too many nights where you're not going to stay in your van. I mean, I can, of course there are whatever certain scenarios. A lot of times though, you're going to have it in, a friend's driveway or somewhere that's probably more safe, not out on a city street. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's see here. More questions that what are some of the places that you'd still like to visit? Like, I mean, I know you've been traveling for quite a few years, but I mean, you can't get to everywhere.
Places that I would love to spend more time that I haven't really yet would be probably a lot of Idaho, which is a lot closer access now. I'd love to get up to Glacier National Park, is probably the top national park that I haven't been to that I'd love to go to. And also Montana, that's kind of like closer access now. And just I've driven through it a few times, but never really spent much time there. Um, Utah is like always a favorite place to go back to. And I'd also love to go spend some more time around Colorado. Kind of did a hot lap through there, and feel like I just got a taste of it. So there's a lot of places I'd love to go back and spend more time, but I'm really kind of looking, I guess, a little bit more in closer surrounding areas for the next year to do some exploring.
Gotcha. Well, you definitely set yourself up in a real central location to all those. You're pretty much about like one state away from kind of all those different locations that you just said. So that's
And that was a huge draw too. That's, one of the pros on my list for Boise, and kind of how I ended up here, of just where it's located and what access it gives you, and the outdoor kind of focused community around here is pretty rad.
yeah, that's definitely, I mean, that was one of the kind of top 2 or 3 states, like Idaho, Montana were definitely kind of two of our biggest ones. And we ended up buying in California. So I think for a while we're kind of sticking it out and holding it in California. But like those are 2 states that I definitely want to like visit and spend some time in, because just the country there is just incredible. So
Yeah, there's a lot to see.
yeah, well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on with so one of the last things I want to ask about was with your collections that you kind of been coming out with, what do are you working on your next collection and release right now?
I am. I've been working on kind of my next project right now. So hopefully to kind of be released this summer. So just a bunch of woven wall hangings. Are kind of all outdoor themed, mountains and ocean, and some more uh geometric design. I'm blanking on the word of what I'm looking for. But yeah, I've been having fun. That was my quarantine project that I picked up, and just kind of been awesome to pick up a new skill, I guess, over the last several months.
Yeah, they're definitely awesome. And then I mean, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your profession, what you do. You do accounting. So if anybody is out there and is looking for any kind of work related to that, which I definitely know a lot of these um people that are on the road full time. I mean, just kind of the same type of lifestyle, the same kind of people. I think it's great that you kind of have a service that can be provided for people that have some of those same
Yeah.
things in mind.
And that was a really cool thing about when I started my own business 2 years ago. So, I've been doing accounting and working with businesses for a long time, but the first year in the van, I was working for this other consulting company, and they kind of knew what I was going and doing. But at the same time, I'd be on like client calls and be like, "Oh, Megan, where are you based out of?" And I'd kind of like avoid the question of living in a van, and like it felt more corporate and more business professional, where once I started my own business, my whole brand became the van and travel and adventure, and enabling other people to do that too. So it was kind of cool to be able to be really open about like, oh yeah, I'm in the van, this is where I'm at today, different place every time. But yeah, I do accounting and financial services for small businesses. I do not do taxes, which is a very common misconception. But yeah, just a lot of bookkeeping and kind of helping small businesses get organized on the back end of any type of business, and kind of put good financial processes in place.
Because anybody running a small business is you can use somebody on the back and helping, because it is it is not always easy to do by yourselves, especially people's first time or things like that.
Yeah, and I love working with small businesses. I think it's so cool and interesting to meet people who are just doing things that they're passionate about. And accounting's not necessarily something I've always been passionate about, but getting to kind of work with really interesting people has always made it, a lot more interesting and fun, and a different kind of passion for me.
Yeah, that's definitely a really unique spin off on the entire kind of thing is that. So that's really awesome. And if anybody is looking for that kind of service, where can they find that at?
Yeah, the best place is just on my website is meganmcable.com, or you can find me on Instagram at the same thing, Megan M Cable. And my business is called Sunny Days. And the business Instagram is Sunny Days Are Made.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm so excited to kind of just see where your journey continues to go. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.